Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping right past the old Cold War slogans to do a serious, objective dive into the Soviet command economy versus market capitalism. No cheering for teams here. We're looking strictly under the hood at the mechanics. What did each system genuinely do better, and where did they literally fall apart?
Right out of the gate, the core trade-off basically looks like this. Capitalism is incredible at choice, innovation, and reading market signals, right? But it really struggles with baseline security and inequality. The Soviet system was the exact opposite. It was a powerhouse for providing foundational security and mobilizing massive resources, but structurally, it was just terrible at flexibility and listening to consumer feedback.
So that brings us to the central question for this explainer. What did the Soviet economy actually do better when it came to human welfare and industrialization? And on the flip side, what structural, deep-rooted problems could it just never solve? We are mapping out the real economic trade-offs today.
Here is our trade-off map for the day. We'll start with systems of trade-offs, then look at security, mobilization, prices and innovation, the reality of shortages, and finally, wrap up with what modern societies can learn from all of this.
All right, let's jump right into Part 1, Systems of Trade-offs, and build our framework.
To compare these fairly, you kind of have to picture a massive balance scale. On one side, you have the market economy. It relies on the chaotic but highly adaptable feedback of prices and voluntary exchange. On the other side, you've got top-down state directives. Soviet planners called these material balances. Basically, instead of letting prices dictate things, state planners just decided how much steel, wheat, or concrete the country needed, and forced resources there to develop fast, without waiting around for private capital. It's essentially deliberate, top-down engineering versus organic, decentralized evolution.
Okay, moving to Section 2, Security and Public Priorities. Let's look at where the Soviet economy was undeniably strong.
Take a look at this number right here, 42. By the early 1960s, the Soviet Samashko healthcare model hit 42 physicians for every 10,000 people. That was actually one of the highest ratios anywhere in the world at the time. By prioritizing broad public health, preventative care, and immunizations over private purchasing power, they drastically dropped infant mortality. They built this massive network of polyclinics to ensure everyone had access. Now, did they have the absolute latest Western tech? No, but the baseline access was universal. And this chart really nails the whole social umbrella concept. Soviet citizens basically traded away consumer choice in exchange for profound, rock-solid security. Think about it. No cyclical capitalist unemployment. Jobs were explicitly guaranteed. Education wasn't just free, they actually gave you a stipend to attend. Housing was treated like a public utility with heavily subsidized rent funded directly by the state. Now sure, this led to weird inefficiencies like what they called employed unemployment, where workers just sat around waiting for parts. But that raw existential financial panic of a capitalist recession, they effectively engineered that right out of existence.
Let's roll into Section 3, Mobilization and Heavy Industry, and see how central planning actually powered the security. By totally tossing out market forces in 1928, Stalin's first five-year plan aggressively mobilized resources. They achieved in a single decade what took capitalist nations a century to do. They focused obsessively on the commanding heights of the economy: coal, steel, electricity. They literally willed entire factory cities like Magnitogorsk into existence out in the Ural Mountains. It absolutely proved that a state could aggressively engineer massive, long-term public goals. And keep in mind, they were doing this while the capitalist West was completely bogged down in the Great Depression.
You can see the sheer brute force of this strategy right here in the numbers. They funneled up to 80% of all investment strictly into heavy industry. The result? Soviet steel production just exploded, from about 4.3 million tons in 1928 to over 18.3 million by 1940. It's a staggering jump. This ruthless prioritization turned an agrarian peasant society into an industrial superpower capable of surviving World War II, all without waiting around for private market forces to magically do it. But here is where the scale starts to tip the other way. Section 4, Prices, Choice, and Innovation. This is exactly where capitalism flexes its muscles.
You see, in a market economy, a price isn't just what you pay at the register. It's literally a piece of data. It's an information network. Fluctuating prices tell producers exactly what consumers want. If everyone wants a certain phone, the price goes up, signaling factories to make more of it. If a store buys too many ugly sweaters, a price drop clears them out. But by strictly fixing prices, the Soviet Union essentially unplugged this entire nervous system. They were flying blind.
And because they were flying blind, you got some incredibly weird results. Soviet managers were rewarded strictly for hitting gross output targets set by the state, often measured just by sheer weight or volume. Because of that, managers absolutely hated innovation. Changing a product line meant shutting down machines, which meant missing quotas and losing your bonus. If your factory's quota was measured in pure weight, guess what? You're going to produce incredibly heavy, chunky furniture, or super thick shoes that nobody wants to wear. Why spend weeks designing a sleek, lightweight shoe when you just need to hit 10 tons of output by Friday? Consumer desires basically didn't exist in the state's math.
Which naturally leads us to Section 5, shortages and bureaucratic limits, or what economists call the calculation problem.
Economists from the Eastern Bloc, like Yanis Kornai, looked around and realized that the endless queues, the black markets, the missing toilet paper, these weren't just temporary glitches. They were systemic flaws baked right into the system. Kornai called this the economy of shortage. The state intentionally kept prices for basic goods artificially low, well below what they cost to make. So demand always outpaced supply. You didn't pay for bread with money, you paid with your time. You spent hours in line, or you turned to a massive black market just to acquire basic daily necessities.
Try to wrap your head around this. Imagine trying to manually predict supply and demand for millions of different items across a massive continent, completely without the guiding light of prices. That was the Central Planning Agency, Gosplan. By 1973, these planners were trying to manually track detailed balances for nearly 2,000 key industrial items. It was impossible. It created these incredibly taut plans. If one train was late or one machine broke in a factory in Siberia, that failure would cascade and cause massive supply chain meltdowns nationwide.
Ultimately, the Soviet model was fantastic at pouring concrete and building giant steel mills during early industrialization. But the moment the global economy shifted toward microchips, software, and the information age, the whole system just hit a brick wall. Real innovation needs thousands of small teams trying things out, taking risks, sharing open data. That messy, chaotic process is exactly what a rigid, top-down, secretive bureaucracy is completely unequipped to handle.
All right, let's move to our final piece, Section 6, Lessons for Modern Societies, and see what we can take away from all this. Now, it's not like the Soviets didn't see this happening. They actually tried to fix their feedback problem with the 1965 Kosygin reforms. They tried to introduce profit motives, rewarding managers for actual sales instead of just raw output. But here's the catch. You can't fake a market. Because the state still rigidly fixed all the prices, profit was just a made-up number on a bureaucratic spreadsheet. It didn't reflect true scarcity or what people actually wanted, so the reforms just totally collapsed under the weight of the bureaucracy.
So, let's step back and look at our final trade-off map. Objectively, the Soviet economy solved some massive, incredibly difficult problems that capitalism often just leaves up to chance. They eradicated the crushing anxiety of unemployment. They mobilized huge resources for public goals. They proved a state could provide universal housing, healthcare, and education. But the trade-off? They created an inflexible economy of shortage, plagued by poor quality and stagnation. Why? Because coordinating a complex modern economy without the flexible feedback of market prices turned out to be fundamentally impossible.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought. As we look forward and design the economies of the future, how do we capture that dynamic, chaotic innovation of the free market while still guaranteeing the fundamental security and public priorities for all our citizens? It really is the great balancing act of our time. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me today.